Posted and posted. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I say we just start since it's being recorded.
yep. Okay. That sounds good. So the first slide that's here is just our introduction. So we are a part of a nonprofit. It's a 501c3 out of Wilmington, Delaware, that does support services for survivors of human trafficking. And we were established in 2016, and our founder, Amy Day, in that first year that she found me at the well, she was also diagnosed with brain cancer, and unfortunately did not win her battle with cancer. So the board rallied around Meet Me at the Well and really lifted up that torch to keep working towards providing survivors with really comprehensive support services. And as you can see, we have a, I would call us a really coordinated team. Like we're really laid back people, just really passionate about our mission. We have two programs. So one is actually funded by Highmark. We have a scholarship program for survivors of trafficking, and it is phenomenal. We are so happy and blessed to have gotten that funding. And then our HEAL program is it's a pilot program to do trauma training for professionals and also to do survivor recovery support with mentorships. And the mentorship program is it's my favorite piece. It's what I love to do. It's what I'm passionate about. Let's see a little bit of why we do this work. So these are the types of trafficking that we see in Delaware, our organization. So every organization is different. And the most common that we see is the drug facilitated trafficking. And next would be the familial trafficking, which is surprising for a lot of people. What I would talk about here is that, for instance, one of the therapists that I work with, about 30% of her caseload are survivors of familial trafficking who are adults, right, at this point. So they, it takes a lot of time and trust and care for someone to disclose that they are a survivor of familial trafficking. And we'll talk about why a little bit here in this segment too. So we also see the massage parlor trafficking and online trafficking. Oh, before we go past that slide. So one of our visions is to open up a residential program for survivors of trafficking. And if you look at the stat, 30% of trafficking survivors will be trafficked again due to not receiving the aftercare and support that they need. So that's something that we really want to focus on and change in Delaware. For tonight, we're going to focus on relationships, and we call it the common thread because it's the one, I call it a life-changing force, because it's the one tool or skill or aspect that I have seen to be life-changing. It's really about recognizing and valuing healthy relationships. These are skills that we can teach. They have nothing to do with being good at math or fast on the track. It does not matter. And it doesn't matter whether the person is, the relationship is romantic or a family relationship or a professional relationship. Like the relationships really are healing. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Penny, did you want to jump in here?
So I guess for me, for like my sense of things as a survivor and someone who started off in familial trafficking at the age of 5, relationships are complex and diverse because of trauma. So it doesn't even necessarily have to do with just human trafficking, but any kind of trauma that you've had in your life. A lot of other survivors that I mentor and even speak to, you know, it's hard for all of us to trust another person, but it's even more so when that trust is broken and you're tricked by someone at some point in your life.
Absolutely.
In relationships, communication is 100% key, because without communication and trust, you can't really grow as a human being.
100%. Nailed it. So challenges and tragedy and trauma, I think challenges and tragedy are a part of life, right? Like we can't really protect our kids or our family from everything, because that would be enabling, right? That's not even healthy. But we can teach them to have faith in the strength of our relationship with them, to have faith in our love for them, and just to have faith in their spirituality or their connection with God. So these kinds of opportunities to teach relationships are powerful. And I think that's why I love this quote, that the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely they will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. So it really is all about love, right? Like this is really, I think I didn't become a therapist because I thought, how complicated is it that you're trying to help someone heal, but you can't have a like a healing relationship with them, right? And I know that's a professional relationship, and that's model boundaries, but I think that's why I chose advocacy, because you can have a really great healing relationship with someone to help them heal through trauma, because you can model those things. You can have boundaries, you can build the trust, you can build the communication, and you can rebuild the social skills, the communication skills in social settings, like things like that. Like, yeah. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about communication and trust. What did you want to add to this?
I think too, as you were saying, the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely that they'll be able to recover from trauma. But also too, to put in perspective that just because someone like me has gone through a whole bunch of trauma, and a lot of people think, oh, it's just going to happen to the abused kid, that they'll be the ones in trafficking, or they're going to be the ones that are going to end up in trouble, or even for an early death. But that's not the case, because as we see, sometimes children who have loving parents, you're just one mistake away from falling for that trick. So I think it's really important to realize that, yeah, there are the protective risk factors, and the risk factors are important to know to help our kids. But
Absolutely.
at both sides of things, right? It can happen, if you were abused, but it can also happen if you had a really good home life too. It doesn't just stay with the abused child.
Absolutely. Right. Because survivors come from all backgrounds. It doesn't matter. There isn't one type and there isn't one background. So you can't say that, somebody who was, just like you said, somebody who was abused, it's not an automatic guarantee that they're going to end up in trafficking. And somebody who, people would be shocked to know that somebody who wasn't abused and really thought that they had a great childhood could still end up in trafficking. It doesn't matter. What does matter is helping someone, and this starts young too, like just teaching a child what a healthy relationship is, and talking about the risk factors and those red flags, which is perfect segue going right in. Thank you, Penny, for doing that. The risk factors, talking about unhealthy relationships, and this can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be. And this is a way to empower your child and empower people that you care about. But I think it is important to talk about these red flags, and you can do this in an age appropriate way. There's all kinds of different programs out there for teen dating violence awareness. There's Power Over Predators by Zoe Ministries. I know the YWCA is doing something. Like there's all these types of programs. I think People's Place also just did a training for at-risk youth and talking about healthy relationships. And of course, like while she's in the classroom, like the girls are like rolling their eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, but you're planting the seed, right? Like you have to start somewhere. And later on, when they're in that situation, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is what they're talking about. Like this person exists. Like this person is actually like trying to convince me to do something I don't want to do. And I thought that they loved me. So yeah.
And when you're also put in that position, I remember being like that teenager and, going through my own abusive situation that I was in, but I fell in love with him because I wanted out of my situation, right? So they're going to listen to what they want to do because as teenagers, we're very impulsive of like, let me go and do my own thing. Like, I don't care what you're telling me, but no, I love him. So I'm just going to go after him because my life is already a disaster anyway. So why not do what I want to do?
Yeah, that teenage piece is so it's oh my goodness. The prefrontal cortex is still cooking. That's what I tell my daughters. Like you don't even know what you're saying. Like you're still raw up there, like your prefrontal cortex. And of course they're rolling their eyes. Like you can't talk to your children about their prefrontal cortex. Like it's just it's not gonna go well. Yeah. But if we look at this slide, these are some of the red flags that are obvious, because it's things that keep happening over and over. These are the things that you can't shake it. If you realize that you're not able to talk about things that may be upsetting you without upsetting the other person, that's a red flag. It's different if it's like one thing once in a while, like somebody's just having a bad day. But if the bad day is like 3 times a week and twice on Sunday, that's more than a bad day. Like that is a behavioral pattern that's borderline, well, dangerous, right? That's when you're going towards down a dangerous path.
I think it's important too, to touch on what you just said, to know that if you ever start to feel unworthy or controlled, or you're in that situation where it's constantly happening over and over again, and you have that little voice inside of you that says, something's not right. I always would want other people to know to not be like me. Like, listen to that voice because at the end of the day, it's going to save you all of the heartache, and you're going to learn a lot from just listening to yourself, because once that little voice gets quieter and you get used to them controlling you or even putting you in isolation or being controlling, right? That little voice gets quieter and then you lose that voice because you think it's your normal.
Yeah, that would be something that we could talk about in another session, is how we can help someone to develop their intuition and instinct, how they can learn to listen to themselves again, because so many times this type of trauma teaches someone not to trust themselves, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, I keep making bad decisions. How can I trust myself? So that would be another great session that we could do later, planting a seed.
And I think too, a lot of what happened to me was familial trafficking. So you're going to hear me say familial trafficking a lot because that's what my expertness is in, right? When it comes on healthy relationships, it's not just romantic relationships or friendships, it also stems from your family. And as someone who went through that, it does make it harder to trust anybody or to even allow myself to have friendships or any kind of relationship, and just because they're family doesn't necessarily mean that you need to stay.
That's huge. That's serious.
Just because it's your family, at the end of the day, your mental health and your safety comes before bloodline, as people like to say. Like, you know, just because they're blood doesn't mean that I need to risk my life for you. And I think that that's really something important that I would want everyone to know is you don't have to risk your life just because someone is blood to you. And
That's hard.
yeah, and even looking at one of the unhealthy red flags with it being isolation, I can honestly say for myself, I got comfortable in isolation. Like it became this normal peace kind of feeling where I'm like, okay, I don't need to let you in. I don't need to start another relationship. I don't want any friends because it's easier to put that wall up, right? Of now, I've been tricked and lied to my whole entire life. Why let someone else in for fear of the same thing happening? Because all of these are very real. After you get used to them over and over again, it becomes your life. And this is your way that you live, is always on guard for one of these things to happen.
So if you could tell yourself or anybody else that is going through coming out of trauma, how could they start to build relationship? Because go that transition from isolation and no trust to stepping out and allowing yourself to be vulnerable is terrifying.
It is
Terrifying.
terrifying. You know, I'm still working through that myself. I tell my friends all the time, I'm a horrible friend. Like there's times where I'm like, oh, I forgot to reach out to you today, or you know, I distance myself when going through things. So it's really hard to say, like, if I could look back at myself and tell myself one thing, it would be to not be scared. Because it is scary when you first meet someone, you're like, oh, I wish that I was this person's friend, but
Yeah.
I
Baby
don't know.
steps.
Yeah, it's baby steps for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yep, I agree. Yeah. And there's one thing that all of these things have in common, and the not being able to communicate, the frequent misunderstandings, the disrespect, the dishonesty, the isolation, and the manipulation. And it's all it's our boundaries, like just not. And just like the whole piece with familial trafficking, that's the toughest one, because with your family you have the least amount of boundaries, and with these unhealthy relationships, it's putting those boundaries in place to protect you and to keep you safe, but also to know when to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And that is tricky. That is so tricky. Like that just takes time to build and to learn. And well, that's why we have therapy. Go therapy. But it helps us move into the next piece where we'll talk a little bit about boundaries. And I know it's 8:57, so we're going to keep it, we're going to, close this down at 9. But so if you do have questions, send to the email. But we do want to talk a little bit about boundaries. Penny, do you want to kick this one off?
Sure. So, you know, boundaries are one of those things that any survivor struggles with. I think anybody in this world struggles with. We all struggle with boundaries some way or another. And they are very uncomfortable to talk about. This is something that, you know, I've had to learn over time is boundaries for sure. Being able to say no was probably the hugest step for me in saying no, like I'm not going to do that, and being able to explain why. Because before I'd be like, oh, I'll do anything because I mean, just a touch on trauma response, you know, I know for a fact for me, it's always been fun. I take care of everybody. And then I forget about myself. So for boundaries, it's always important to try to learn to be able to say no.
Yeah, there's a whole theory and process for saying no. I think there's a book called like How to Say No. Oh, I am terrible at it. So I'm right there with you. I am awful. Like I just want to do things for people. There is a little post that I keep that says, you are not what you can do for other people. And that's a good reminder for me. Like you're more than that. So you don't have to, I don't have to identify with what I do for people because that's my trauma response because my parents are extremely strict and tough and it was based off of, what you were doing and how you were behaving. So that is my trauma response is just to do things for people because I know that that's the easiest way to appease people and to just stay out of trouble. So I totally I get it in that regard. Um, but
Because
you're
it's
right. It's
easier just to do things for people because then it's okay. I didn't do any harm to you because now I'm doing everything for you.
yeah.
Like let me
Yeah.
everything out here. Let me hold your hand. Like what else do you need? It's one of those, but then we forget about ourselves.
Right, right. And then
So
respecting other people's boundaries too. Um, but we have here like what is not negotiable, but it really it's what are you not willing to put up with? Like what is making your stomach say, ugh, I really don't like when this happens. Like your body speaks to you when you're in a situation and your body tells you what is not negotiable and what you're willing or not willing to put up with. So I think we need to I need to stay focused on that. We need to get better at that.
for sure.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's already 9 o'clock.
We have a little bit more to go. A little bit more.
A little more. So I wanted to end on a positive note, and this is just really quick. This is one of my favorite things to um, to implement into my personal life, and it's called the 5-to-1 principle. And if there could ever be like a magic formula to relationships, it's this. It's that for every as long as there are 5 positive interactions for every one, and I talked a little about this in a video that we posted before, but your relationship is more likely to be stable, healthy, happy. And I think it was Dr. Where's the doctor's name right now? Dr. Gottman, Dr. John Gottman. He was the one that did the research on this, and it's been proven. Like that's the magic ratio. Like no more, no less. Like do that. I mean, you can always do more, right? And never not have enough people or somebody saying something nice to you. But yeah, so implementing this into your life so that, and you can do this with your children, you can do this with your colleagues and anybody. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, and it works. So when all else fails and things feel like they are awful and not going the right way, we have this to focus on. 5 good things to balance out the one negative thing, which just goes to tell you that if there's a lot of negativity going around, there's only so much kindness that you can do to balance it out. So like it's a red flag. Like if you're like doing all good things all the time and it's not like balancing out, then I should get a red flag. I just want to wave like a red flag. And just have it and just start waving it. But yeah, so this is definitely a protective factor. Um, did you want to add anything about this, about like maintaining healthy relationships and the 5-to-1?
So, I mean, I'm still learning the 5-to-1 because, I mean, there's so much negativity in this world and, so much happening in everyone's life, especially with COVID going on right now and the way that it's just affecting people's lives. And, to being able to express kindness, just knowing and being that sunshine for someone. And even when we're out doing outreach, just being able to see what we're doing, they have smiles on their faces and they're happy for our help. And I think that that's really important here too, is to realize that even with this ratio does come a lot of positivity. and to always remember to listen to that little voice inside of you, because it will tell you if something isn't right, and it will tell you about the correct ratio.
It it absolutely will. Yes. So this is a really good reminder. Just speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. And that's it. So we will close it down. It's 9:04. We'll stop recording.